the early morning hours of November 13th, Dylan Mortensen heard a noise coming from the floor above her. Initially, she assumed it was her roommate, Kaylee, playing with her new puppy. A short while later, Dylan heard something horrifying. "There's someone here." It was Kaylee's voice. After looking outside her room twice, Dylan then heard a man's voice coming from the direction of Xana's room. When she looked outside her room for a third time, Dylan came face to face with a monster. The man in a mask walking towards her had just murdered 4 people. The horrors that unfolded in 1122 King Road grabbed the nation's attention and garnered worldwide intrigue. This is the horrifying story of the Moscow murders. Moscow is a small, quaint town in north-central Idaho with a population of around 25,000 people. It is a college town, being the home of the University of Idaho. These students make up roughly 40% of the overall population. Included in that statistic were 20-year-old Ethan Chapin from Conway, Washington, 20-year-old Sana Kernodle from Post Falls, Idaho, 21-year-old Kaylee Goncalves from Rathdrum, Idaho, and 21-year-old Madison Mogan from Coeur d'Alene, also from Idaho. Madison and Kaylee were longtime best friends. They met in the 6th grade and attended high school together before both deciding on the University of Idaho, where Madison was a senior majoring in marketing and Kaylee a senior majoring in general studies. Xana was a junior studying marketing and member of Pi Beta Phi sorority, and Ethan, her boyfriend, was a freshman majoring in recreation, sport, and tourism management, and member of the Sigma Chi fraternity. 3 girls and 2 other young women lived together and rented an off-campus home on 1122 King Road in Moscow. It was a large home with 3 floors and 6 bedrooms, conveniently located just a 17-minute walk away from the university campus. Ethan didn't live with the girls. He stayed in an on-campus fraternity, but would often spend nights with Xana at the house on King Road. Each floor had 2 bedrooms. Madison and Kaylee stayed on the top floor, and Xana stayed on the second. It was on the evening of November 12th. Ethan and Xana were out at a party at his fraternity house. They were there for about an hour, from 8 p.m. to 9 p.m. The pair got back home at 1:45 a.m. That same evening, Madison and Kaylee had gone to the Corner Club, a downtown sports bar. They arrived at 10 p.m. and left at 1:30 a.m. At 1:41 a.m., Madison and Kaylee were spotted at a local food truck, the Grub Truck. This particular spot live-streamed their business and the people that gathered outside. Madison and Kaylee could be seen chatting and smiling while they waited for their food. They then got a ride home and were back at 1:56 a.m. Police initially believed the girls got an Uber home, but they later changed that statement to them getting a ride by a private party. Xana, Ethan, Madison, and Kaylee were all back by 2 a.m. Dylan and the 5th roommate were back in the house by 1 a.m. From 2:26 a.m. to 2:52 a.m. Kaylee made several uncompleted phone calls to inform her ex-boyfriend, who also attended the University of Idaho. Madison also called the same ex-boyfriend 3 times. Initially, these calls caused much speculation, but it was later determined that they were not connected to the case. At around 4 a.m., Xana received a DoorDash order. Eerily, this was not long before the masked intruder entered the home. When the first reports came out, they suggested that Dylan and their other roommate had been asleep on the first floor when the attack occurred, sleeping through the commotion. A former occupant of the house did respond to this by saying that when you were on the first floor, it was not easy to hear what was going on in the upper levels. It was only recently, when an affidavit was released, that we know what actually happened. The other roommate was sleeping on the bottom floor. That much was correct, but Dylan had been sleeping on the second floor, as were Xana and Ethan. She was awoken shortly after 4 a.m. by what she thought was Kaylee playing with her puppy on the floor above. Shortly after that, Dylan heard someone say, "There's someone here." She believed it was Kaylee. Investigators think this could have been Xana speaking, as cell phone analysis showed she was on TikTok at 4:12 a.m. Dylan opened her door and looked out, but saw nothing. When she looked a second time, she heard faint crying sounds coming from Xana's room along with a man's voice saying, "It's okay, I'm going to help you." It was when Dylan opened her door a third time that she came face to face with a masked man. Dylan had no idea who this was in their house. It isn't yet clear if he saw her, or panicked and chose to not acknowledge her, but the man walked straight past her and exited the home through the sliding glass doors. Dylan was frozen in fear during the encounter. Once the man had passed her, she quickly locked herself in her room. A 911 call wasn't made until 11:58 a.m., roughly 8 hours after the attacks. The call wasn't for any murders, but requesting aid for an unconscious person. It hasn't been made public who made the call, but it did come from the cell phone of either Dylan or the other remaining roommate. When police arrived, they found no forced entry to the home, and nothing appeared damaged or disturbed inside. It was soon apparent that this wasn't a simple case of someone who had fainted. The authorities were on the scene of a quadruple homicide. Madison Mogan, Kaylee Goncalves, Xana Kernodle, and Ethan Chapin had been stabbed to death on the third and second floors. They had each been stabbed multiple times. As the media got wind of what had happened, the case spread like wildfire, which is understandable due to the insane nature of the case. Everyone was desperate for answers, but the Moscow Police Department were keeping their cards close to their chest. While thousands of internet sleuths were trying to crack the case, behind the scenes, the detectives had quickly zoned in on someone. A knife sheath had been found on the scene that had DNA present on it. This was crucial in later charges that were made. After much speculation and a good amount of false accusations made by some members of the public, we finally got a name: Brian Kohberger. Just over 6 weeks after the murders occurred, a suspect was taken into custody in Pennsylvania, 28-year-old Brian Christopher Kohberger. He was promptly charged with all 4 murders in the first degree and 1 count of burglary. But who was this man, and how had police tracked him down in Pennsylvania? Kohberger was completing his Ph.D. in criminology at Washington State University. He also worked as a teaching assistant at the school. The Pullman campus, where he attended his studies, was just a short drive away from Moscow. Kohberger completed his bachelor's degree at DeSales University in 2020, before doing further graduate studies at the same university until June 2022. He then began working towards his Ph.D. at Washington State. On December 7th, police announced they were looking for the occupant or occupants of a 2011 to 2013 white Hyundai Elantra that was in the area when the victims were murdered. They stated that this person or those people may have critical information to share regarding the murders. At the time, it was not clear whether this person was a suspect or just a possible witness. We now know it was Brian Kohberger, is that white Hyundai Elantra. The car had been spotted driving past the residence on 3 occasions that night, some reports suggesting at a high speed. Kohberger's cell phone pinged him in that area at the time of the murders, along with a dozen other visits from late June. While a link between him and any of the victims has not been made public, that could suggest that the attack had been planned for months prior. But a car being outside a home isn't concrete enough. To make an arrest and have a strong enough case, police needed something more, and that came with the DNA that was found on the knife sheath. When they ran it against known criminals in the system, no hits came up, but thankfully, they already had their eyes on a certain someone and just needed to run his DNA against what they found on scene. On November 29th, police obtained surveillance footage for the parking lot of Kohberger's apartment building in Pullman, Washington, just 10 miles from the murder scene. Moscow officers went to the parking lot to find a license plate of the vehicle, as it matched the white Hyundai Elantra they were looking for. When they ran a search on the number plates, they found multiple previous incidents with this vehicle being pulled over in the past. More importantly, officers found out who owned the car: Brian Kohberger. This is what allowed police to look into his cell phone records and begin connecting him to the crime. Kohberger and his father had driven over 2,500 miles from Idaho to Kohberger's parents' home in Pennsylvania for the holiday break. Kohberger had no idea at the time, but he was being watched by undercover officers. They watched on as he emptied his trash out in a neighbor's bin, which is how police were able to DNA match him to the Brian Kohberger is currently in custody, and his preliminary hearing has been set for June 26 so that his defense team have time to prepare their case. Kohberger's parents are not paying for his legal representation, and he is being represented by a public defender. There are still so many unknowns in this case, with the biggest one being why. What possessed this 28-year-old criminology student to murder 4 innocent lives in such a brutal fashion? Was this something Kohberger had long fantasized about? Was that why he studied criminology in the first case? Did he have any connections to the victims? More information will undoubtedly come out as the case moves closer to trial. This is an ongoing case. While there has been direct DNA evidence tying Kohberger to the crime, he is presumed innocent until proven guilty.